Mike, we
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time to join us today. A lot of changes for the Steelers this offseason. And now we're a couple weeks into camp. What has been kind of the most impactful change that this Pittsburgh team has seen?
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised when they made the blockbuster trade dealing Minkah Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. And so far early in camp, I've been really impressed from what I've seen from Jalen Ramsey, to the point that I would almost say that if the Steelers had traded 1-for-1 Minkah for Jalen Ramsey, they might have won that trade straight up. They've got Jalen playing in a number of different roles. He's playing in the slot and the nickel. You're seeing him in the base defense play a little bit of free safety. He also obviously made a name for himself as an outside corner, shadowing opponents' top receivers. He still has that in his bag and has been working as an outside corner. And he had an interception last weekend of Aaron Rodgers that was just so incredibly instinctive and athletic, going up and using every bit of his long reach to get the football. So I think that he's going to be a huge addition for this defense. And on a team that has T.J. Watt, I think that he could contend for maybe the best player on that defense.
So, Mike, sticking with the defense then, if this is what Jalen Ramsey's going to be, we know what TJ Watt is. We know that the Steelers' identity is generally more defensive. I mean, what's the upside for them? Top 10 defense, top 5, top 3? Like, what could you realistically expect when you're thinking about the ceiling of the Pittsburgh Steelers defense?
Here in Pittsburgh, that's a big debate because the Steelers by far are going to be spending the most, and it's going to be the fourth consecutive year that they have the NFL's highest paid defense. And so a lot of people would say, if you pay the most, you should be the best. And it's interesting because the defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin, he's coordinated perennial top 10 defenses. And last year, the Steelers won 2 games in which the offense failed to score a touchdown. And, they were tied for the league lead in turnovers forced. But honestly, people were saying they expected more out of that defense. And they really wilted down the stretch against quality quarterback play, more physical teams, ultimately giving up nearly 300 rushing yards in that playoff loss to the Baltimore Ravens. So right now, players haven't been shy to say, we think we could be the number one defense. And, I think that there's some personnel changes. There's also some schematic changes that you're going to see, some different coverages you wouldn't necessarily expect out of the Steelers. But one thing you would expect out of the Steelers is a lot of blitzing and a lot of pressure. And they had gotten away from that in recent years. And I think, Jalen Ramsey could be part of the solution with more pressures because the nickel pressure has become such a big part of this game, and he's going to be very good at it. And so he's one of many guys that they have that they can bring pressure from different ways, and maybe that can help T.J. Watt be a little bit more productive as well. So, I think that this defense, you look at it, there's not really a weak link. Like if there's a weak link, it's Juan Thornhill at free safety. And I know Cleveland Browns fans, they were critical of him saying he was invisible after getting, I think, $11 million guaranteed a couple years ago. If he's invisible on this defense, it means he's probably doing his job and that this defense is pretty effective.
All right, so let's go over to the offensive side of the ball. Biggest change coming at quarterback, the most important position. Aaron Rodgers now taken over there. Then you add DK Metcalf. How has Aaron Rodgers so far fit in with this team and just kind of the production that you've seen from him already? I know it's training camp, but what have you seen from Aaron Rodgers in terms of his fit so far with Pittsburgh?
Well, I'm glad that you asked the question and you said Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf because that's a really important connection for this team. And Mike Tomlin, he loves to play these little games. And one of the ones he did this year is in the dorms, DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers are sharing a suite. So they've got to share a bathroom. They're right next to each other. And that's such an important piece of this offense because you're seeing Aaron Rodgers really get the ball to DK. And, I don't know what, Aaron Rodgers' mobility is necessarily. He doesn't look bad. He actually looks fairly decent. But he might not be that magician that can buy himself time and attack downfield. But he does have that quick trigger and that signature quick release. And that meshes really well with DK Metcalf as a big-bodied receiver running a lot of slants and in-breaking routes. So I think that's going to be a huge part of their playbook going forward. But overall, looking at Aaron Rodgers, just a couple of days ago, he was talking about how when you come to the line of scrimmage, you want to have that clear picture. And right now it's just a little bit fuzzy as he works himself into a new offense coordinated by Arthur Smith. So, there have been overall my category, the way I'd categorize Aaron Rodgers has been up and down. He's had some good days. He's had some rough days. So, it's still a work in progress. And, this time of training camp early on, no matter what level of football you're talking, high school, college, NFL, they'll always tell you the defense is ahead of the offense. Right now, the Steelers defense that should be pretty good looks well ahead of what the offense is doing.
Mike, sticking with the offense, like you're talking about in the weapons that Aaron Rodgers has, we just talked about DK Metcalf, but I think a lot of us were surprised when the trade with the Steelers and the Dolphins went down, and Jonnu Smith also came back because he was a big part of what the Dolphins did last year. What do you expect out of him? Is he the second option here for the Steelers behind DK Metcalf, or what do you expect his role to be and his relationship with Aaron Rodgers to be?
Yeah, well, he has a really good relationship with the offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith was a tight ends coach in Tennessee early in his career, worked with Jonnu Smith directly, then featured him as the offensive coordinator. Later, those two worked with the Atlanta Falcons when they were in Atlanta together. So Arthur Smith is really familiar with Jonnu Smith. And Arthur Smith may be the NFL's most tight end-friendly offensive coordinator. Last year, the Steelers led the league in 3 tight end sets. And they're leaning into the tight end position even more this year. They put out a personnel grouping the other day, no running backs and 4 tight ends in the huddle. And then Jonnu Smith actually lined up in the backfield as a running back. And they handed him the ball in a couple plays. They pitched it to him on a toss. They completed a pass out of the backfield into the flat. So, Arthur Smith likes to look at his tight ends kind of as like wild cards in his deck. And they have some versatile guys at that position, not only Jonnu Smith, but also, Darnell Washington is really as big as a tackle, but has really nice soft hands. And I think that you could see him being used more as a playmaker in the passing game. They've also got Pat Freiermuth, and, he's one of the top 10 highest paid tight ends in the league and is really good at beating zone defenses in particular. So I think this is going to be really a tight end centric kind of offense. And Jonnu Smith is definitely a big piece of that puzzle.
Steelers beat reporter for The Athletic, Mike DeFabo, joining us here on the Bettor Angle. Mike, this is a Steelers team that has pretty much come out and said, we want to win now. They made a lot of these moves because they feel like they have a small window here. Say the Steelers make the playoffs, but yet, another first-round exit, wild card exit. What's next for Pittsburgh? How do they get out of this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with the Steelers. A couple years ago, I remember Art Rooney, the team president and owner, saying, I'm never going to apologize for making the playoffs in a year that ends with, an 18th, a 17th game, 18th game in the playoffs. Unfortunately, it's now been 8 years since the Steelers have won a playoff game. And the fan base is getting a little bit, impatient. And I think even these moves, how aggressive Omar Khan has been, it signals that there's a bit of desperation, that they need to get past that and they need to get over the hump. For me, the biggest question is just what kind of quarterback play do you get out of Aaron Rodgers? And can he sustain it? Because I think there's going to be moments this year where, the Steelers are off to a pretty decent start. They have a softer schedule at the beginning. And, I imagine just like last year when Russell Wilson put up a big 400-plus passing game, and you started to try to convince yourself if the Steelers would get this, maybe they could be a real legitimate contender. But then ultimately an older aging quarterback wasn't able to sustain it. And I think that's my biggest concern with Aaron Rodgers. I think we're going to see the flashes of brilliance. And there are going to be throws or games where you say, that's the Aaron Rodgers of old. And if the Steelers get this in the playoffs, they could be contenders. But really, are you going to get that consistently at a high enough level to compete in a division that also features Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson, in a conference that also includes, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes? It's a quarterback-driven conference, and if you don't have the gunslinger to stand toe-to-toe, do you really have a chance to contend? And that's my biggest question this season.
Well, Mike, you kind of led me right into my next question for you of what are your expectations for this Steelers team? Obviously, it's early. It's August 2nd. Obviously, we know there's a lot of time for them to work out the kinks, shake the rust off. But in that division where you have the Ravens, the Bengals, and in a tough conference, what are your expectations for this team? Do you think that they can win a playoff game, win a couple? Are they actual contenders to win the division? When you think about this Steelers team, what are you envisioning in your head for them when we get to the end of the year? Where does it end? How far do they get to? We got about 60 seconds.
I think that they're going to be similar to last year and similar to the last couple of years, where I imagine them right around 10 wins. I think that they're a playoff team that's going to be fighting the last weeks of the season to qualify. but I just don't know if they have it in them to really make a run as a playoff contender. I think if they get the right matchup, maybe they're playing Houston or Denver or the Chargers, I think they can win that game. I just, still in my mind, I think they would be hard-pressed to win a playoff game if they see one of the big dogs in the AFC.
Mike, we appreciate your time. Thanks for spending part of your Saturday afternoon with us. Thanks for all the insight as well. We'll talk to you down the road, I'm sure. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me on.